let's just jump right into it, shall we? How exactly did a humble carpenter from a tiny village like Nazareth end up literally changing the course of human history? Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most widely read, heavily debated, and absolutely influential narratives ever recorded. We're bypassing the usual sermons, and instead, we're looking directly at what the ancient source texts and historical records actually have to say.
So what we're doing today is conducting a completely impartial historical and textual analysis of the Bible and the life of Jesus Christ. Whether you know these texts like the back of your hand or you're just looking for a refresher, our goal is to map out this absolute epic of a story clearly. We're going to look at the events, the major claims, and even some pretty wild historical mysteries, exactly as they're presented in the ancient accounts and by modern researchers.
Here's our roadmap for today. We'll go from Genesis to Moses, cover the birth of the Messiah, explore the miracles and teachings, look at the crucifixion and resurrection, and finally wrap up with some unsolved historical mysteries.
Section 1. Genesis to Moses.
You know, to really grasp the story of Jesus, the texts tell us we've got to first understand the massive, sweeping history that precedes him. According to these foundational texts, the whole thing kicks off with a divine creator who literally speaks the universe into existence over 6 days, and that culminates in the creation of Adam and Eve. But as you probably know, innocence is lost in the Garden of Eden through deception, and that brings mortality right into the world. As humanity multiplies, well, so does corruption. That leads to the Great Flood, where only Noah, his family of 8, and pairs of animals survive in this massive ark. Fast forward a few generations, and we see the rise of patriarchs like Abraham. He gets this promise that his descendants will be as numerous as the stars. Beautiful, right? But it comes with a pretty heavy caveat. His people, the Israelites, eventually face 400 years of bitter slavery in Egypt. And that sets the stage for Moses, who's called from a burning bush to lead roughly 2 million people out of bondage.
Now, all of this ancient history sets up a massive narrative shift in the Bible. Out in the desert, at Mount Sinai, Moses receives the Ten Commandments, which forms the Old Testament law. Think of it as a really rigid system of strict moral, social, and religious rules. But as we move forward in the timeline, this rigid system stands in total contrast to what the texts call the New Covenant. That's this future era of grace and forgiveness that Jesus would eventually introduce.
But hey, before that freedom was actually won, the texts describe 10 absolute terrifying plagues unleashed upon Egypt. We are talking water turning to blood, massive swarms of locusts, total darkness, culminating in the really tragic loss of the firstborn. And that is what finally forced the Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. It's a story on a terrifyingly epic scale, and it absolutely cemented the Israelites' cultural identity and the reliance on their God for centuries to come.
Section 2. Birth of the Messiah.
So, hundreds of years pass. The Israelites are now living under the iron fist of the Roman Empire, and they are desperately waiting for a promised deliverer. Now, an historical analysis of the different biblical accounts of this deliverer's birth reveals some pretty interesting nuances. Some sources really emphasize the Nazareth connection, that Mary and Joseph were from Nazareth but had to travel to Bethlehem because the Roman Emperor Augustus ordered a census. Other accounts, though, focus heavily on Bethlehem as the birthplace to fulfill ancient prophecies, noting that the family actually fled to Egypt later to escape a massacre before finally settling down in Nazareth. But regardless of the exact logistics there, the text universally points to a miraculous virgin birth.
If we break down the whole nativity story exactly as described in the sources, it basically has 3 very distinct acts. First up, the manger. Finding no room at the inn, Mary gives birth in a stable, greeted by local shepherds who claim angels actually announce the arrival. Second, the star. Astrologers from the east observe this completely unique celestial alignment, signaling a new king, and they bring gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. And third, the escape. King Herod, feeling super threatened by rumors of a rival king, orders the execution of infants in Bethlehem. Joseph is warned in a dream, so he flees with his family to Egypt, only coming back to Nazareth after Herod's death.
Section 3. Miracles and Teachings. Skipping forward to his adulthood, the texts tell us Jesus basically lived a totally quiet life until about the age of 30 when he's baptized in the River Jordan. And over the next 3 years, well, the texts record an absolute flurry of supernatural events that caused his popularity to just explode. According to the accounts, his very first miracle was quietly turning water into fine wine at a wedding in Cana. From there, the claims escalate dramatically. We're talking forgiving sins, healing a paralyzed man who was literally lowered through a roof, feeding a massive crowd of 5,000 people with just 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish, and even terrifying his own disciples by walking right toward their boat on the water during a violent storm.
But you know, it wasn't just the alleged miracles that drew people in, it was his message. Imagine for a second living in a society completely obsessed with strict religious law and oppressed by an occupying Roman army. During his famous Sermon on the Mount, he didn't preach armed rebellion. No, he preached things like love your enemies and pray for those who persecute you. He actively championed the meek, the humble, and the peacemakers, which was a massive challenge to the rigid religious elite of his day.
Section 4. Crucifixion and Resurrection.
Of course, his immense popularity and his total willingness to challenge traditions put him on a direct collision course with the authorities. The sources detail a really tense, incredibly rapid sequence of events during the Passover festival. It all begins with the Last Supper, where Jesus introduces a new covenant using bread and wine. Later that very night, in the Garden of Gethsemane, he's betrayed by his own disciple Judas with a kiss. He's arrested and hauled before the Roman governor, Pilate. And despite finding no real fault in him, Pilate eventually bows to the pressure of the religious leaders and the angry crowd. Jesus is scourged, mocked with the crown of thorns, forced to carry his own cross, and finally crucified at Mount Golgotha right alongside 2 thieves. The biblical narrative states that as he hung there on the cross, he actually asked God to forgive his executioners. Then, at 3 in the afternoon, darkness fell. The earth quaked, the massive temple curtain literally tore in two, and Jesus uttered his final words, "Father, into your hands I commend my spirit." After that, he was taken down and sealed inside a stone tomb under a heavy Roman guard. But the text firmly asserts that the story didn't end there. On Sunday morning, Mary Magdalene and some other women arrived, only to find the heavy stone rolled away and the tomb completely empty. The sources report that over the next 40 days, Jesus appeared multiple times to his followers. He even let a doubting Thomas physically touch his wounds, before finally ascending into heaven, leaving his disciples with the monumental mission to spread his teachings to the entire world.
Section 5. Unsolved Historical Mysteries.
Okay, now let's completely shift gears. While the biblical text provides a very specific narrative, historians have spent centuries looking at the margins, which leads us to our biggest, most glaring question. What exactly happened to Jesus between the ages of 13 and 29? The Bible mentions him at age 12, debating priests in the temple in Jerusalem, and then absolute silence. It is basically the ultimate historical gap year. He completely vanishes from the historical record until he suddenly reappears at age 30.
This 17-year gap is commonly referred to by researchers as the missing years. Did he simply stay put in Nazareth, quietly working as a carpenter under Joseph, just like traditional interpretations suggest? Or was he off doing something else entirely? This massive, gaping void in the timeline has sparked intense historical speculation for centuries and has given rise to some seriously fascinating alternative theories.
One of the most prominent alternative narratives out there is the Eastern Journey theory. Some historical researchers claim that during those undocumented 17 years, Jesus actually traveled along ancient trade routes to the East, specifically to India, to study Eastern philosophy and mysticism. And it gets even more radical. Some alternative theorists claim that he didn't even die on the cross, but actually survived the crucifixion and returned to the East to live out the rest of his life. To see exactly how far these alternative theories go, we just need to look at the Rosabal Shrine located in Srinagar, Kashmir. Some researchers confidently claim that this is the actual historical tomb of Jesus, asserting that he lived a long life in the region and passed away at around 100 years of age. Now, to be clear, while these theories are heavily disputed and absolutely not accepted by mainstream biblical scholars, they do remain a pretty fascinating footnote in the historical analysis of his life. So what should you really take away from all of this? We've traced the timeline from cosmic creation to an empty tomb, and we even touched on ancient Kashmiri shrines. Ultimately, you kind of have to ask yourself, does analyzing these different accounts and historical mysteries challenge what we think we know? Or does it simply deepen the enigma of a man whose short, undocumented life literally reset the calendar of human history? It is a profound puzzle, and one that is for sure worth exploring further on your own.